everyone, and welcome to One Cyber World's 2023 Global Cyber Conference, the definitive forum for shaping the cyber landscape of the future. As we stand at the nexus of technology and strategy, One Cyber World delves into not only the vulnerabilities in cybersecurity, but also the expansive opportunities that our interconnected world offers. One Cyber World is at the forefront of defining the trajectory of both cybersecurity and broader digital technologies, and brings together the brightest minds in the field to inform, challenge, and inspire. This year's conference is yet another example of our commitment to leading meaningful conversations that result in actionable insights for a safer and more dynamic digital world. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Vlad Brodsky, the Chief Information Security Officer at OTC Markets Group. He will be discussing modern multi-factor authentication technologies. So I hand over to you.
Thank you, James. Really appreciate that introduction. As James mentioned, my name is Vlad Brodsky. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at OTC Markets Group. A little bit about the firm that I work in. OTC Markets Group is a market for over-the-counter equity securities in the United States. We have over 12,000 securities on our platform. We have different parts of our business. One part, as I mentioned, is that we're a market similar to some of the larger markets like NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. We also sell market data from our market, and we also have issuer services products that allow us to actually put new companies and securities on our platforms. A little bit of a background about myself before we get into the presentation. Essentially, I have been at the OTC Markets Group for over 9 years. Prior to that, I held the role as a Chief Security Officer at a small financial organization. Before that, I did a number of years of local government consulting. And before that, I started my career in financial services, working for a trading company, stock trading company. Today's topic of the presentation is modern MFA technologies. This is a topic that's kind of one of my favorite topics in cybersecurity. For one reason or another, I think it's something that's been on top of my mind for many years. It is not, it's definitely a small subset of what I do on a day-to-day basis, what my team and I do. But it is an important topic to discuss because oftentimes, multi-factor authentication has been misunderstood and other times ignored. And over the last few years, it actually has been embraced by most companies. So quick agenda for today's discussion. We're going to cover some very quick legacy MFA solutions, where I'm just going to briefly discuss what those are. And then the majority of the presentation, we're going to spend on an overview of Passkeys, which is a new multi-factor authentication technology, the differences between them, use cases, some challenges, and then hopefully, if time allows, maybe we can have some Q&A and closing thoughts. So without further ado, I want to jump into the legacy multi-factor authentication. Well, firstly, what is multi-factor authentication? Multi-factor authentication is, I imagine a lot of people on this call know, is a technology that allows you to enhance your authentication experience, right? It's something that something that you have, or something that you know, which is a password, followed by something that you have or you are, which is that second multi-factor. right? And these multi-factors come in several different shapes and forms, right? One of these has one of the most traditional ones is an SMS code, right? So we've often, most of us are familiar with this. You're trying to log on to your bank. You put in your username and password, and they send you a text message to your cell phone. This is at this point known as one of the least secure forms of multi-factor authentication, and this has especially been publicized through many SIM swapping attacks that took a lot of money away from various investors, including those investors who invested in cryptocurrency. So over the last 5 years, this form of multi-factor authentication has kind of been phased out, but it is still around. Another form is email. Similar situation. You put in your username and password, and you get the code, the 6-number code, usually in an email. And the third is OTP, one-time password. This is where you have your phone, and on your smartphone you'll have a Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator or a myriad of other authenticator apps, where you'll have a code that will continually change, usually about every 60 seconds. The previous version of this technology was on the key fob. I remember having one from RSA, where the same thing, the number keeps changing. And the last item here is an on-device prompt, right? And usually this is exhibited as a push notification, right? So you're using your username and password to log into a service provider, such as email, and in order to validate your authentication, you have an app on your phone, perhaps from your job, that will send you a push. The push will essentially ask you to tap approve, usually, or deny. And sometimes you will be asked to do what's called number matching, which is where on your screen as you're logging in, you're going to see 3 different numbers usually. And on your phone, you're going to also see those numbers. I'm sorry, you're going to see a single number on your screen. And on your phone, you're going to see usually 3 different numbers. You're going to have to pick the correct number that you see on the screen. So just to quickly cover issues with each of these. Well, so we did talk about SMS codes being vulnerable to phishing attacks and in some cases SIM swapping attacks. Emails also have similar issues, right? MFA code sent through email is only as secure as your email. If your email itself is not protected with multi-factor authentication, then those codes can be intercepted as well. Or if someone breaks into your email, that issue persists. One-time password and on-device prompts. The biggest issues with these is that in recent years, they've been used by malicious actors as part of phishing campaigns. A lot of times these phishing campaigns they target people at night, and what they will do is they will send many attempts to get into the account. Now, I must say that the prelude to this is the ability to get the username and password for the user, which isn't always easy, but does happen with stolen credentials and things like that. But if the bad actor already has access to that information, they will many times be able to get into corporate resources using these 2 methods. So what has happened in recent years to improve the situation and get us from legacy MFA to what I would call modern multi-factor authentication technologies? Well, one word for this is passkeys, right? So what are passkeys? Passkeys are basically what's called a FIDO credential. There's a FIDO Alliance, which is a group that's focused on improving password-based systems. Members of that alliance are some of the biggest names that you probably have heard of, including Google, Apple, Microsoft, and a number of others, including Yubico. So, these FIDO credentials themselves have been around for many years, right? So, for example, if you've ever used a YubiKey USB key, that is actually considered to be a FIDO2 credential, right? And a passkey. The differences between passkeys we're going to see in a minute, but that's basically what they are. They're essentially a FIDO credential, and the good thing about them is that they're able to in various different forms protect users against phishing much better than legacy multi-factor authentication technologies. Now, I will preface this by saying if a company is choosing between not having multi-factor authentication at all and having to deal with any multi-factor authentication system, and for some reason they're not able to deploy passkeys in the form of hardware authentication keys or software passkeys, they absolutely should do some form of MFA, right? Because any form of MFA is better than no MFA at all, right? So I mentioned that passkeys can be phishing resistant, but what makes them phishing resistant, right? Well, what makes passkeys phishing resistant is that the passkey credentials are registered normally to a human, right? And the takeaway is that passkeys don't allow users to authenticate to illegitimate services or websites, right? Passkeys, it's much more difficult for attackers to manipulate passkeys because they don't have physical access to them in the case of physical passkeys. And in the case of software passkeys, which we're going to cover in a minute, it is still quite difficult for attackers to get access to them as well, right? Passkeys are also, they essentially follow public key cryptography, right? A passkey is a pair, it's a public key with an unguessable private key, which is never shared, right? And so because of the fact that the private key is never shared, this is an extremely difficult barrier for an attacker to kind of get around. So I did allude to the fact that there are different types of passkeys out there, right? There's the physical passkey, which traditionally is a USB key, something like a YubiKey, for example, and there are others. Google makes some, I believe they're called Titan. Some of the modern physical keys, they also work with through NFC technologies. They have different types of USB connectors, right? So if you're trying to use the physical passkey on a smartphone, for example, there are certain passkeys that physical keys that will work with Apple iPhones prior to iPhone 15, which have Lightning ports. There are keys that work over USB-C, which is the latest USB standard, physical standard. But there are also keys that work over NFC, near field communication, which allows for more wireless authentication with that physical key. But there are also software passkeys. So software passkey essentially is a similar concept to a physical passkey, except that the private key for that passkey is stored in some cloud, usually, right? And so that allows a number of advantages for that key from a usability perspective, right? So, for example, if you are storing your passkey in iCloud, in Apple iCloud, or Google Cloud, you have the ability to replicate or sync that passkey across multiple devices. For consumers, I think that is a really powerful capability, right? Because passkeys in some cases allow you to do passwordless authentication, depending on your service provider. In some cases, passkeys will act as a multi-factor authentication, as we were discussing before. But the key here is, even if you lose a particular device, because the passkey private key is stored in the cloud, you are not going to lose your passkey. The downside to this is, and there are many, and we're going to discuss a few in a minute, is that one downside is that you're essentially trusting your cloud provider to store those private keys properly. And if the cloud provider, in the worst case scenario, does have a breach, you potentially could lose, you could lose your account, or your account can become compromised. With physical passkeys, that is mitigated. That issue is mitigated because the private key only exists on the physical key, and you have possession of that key. If you lose that key, then a similar situation can occur, of course, where the potential attacker, whoever found or stole your key, could theoretically access your resources, but of course they would have to know potentially other things, such as your username and password, if you're not using passwordless. So moving on, what are the differences between some of these synced and hardware-bound keys? As I mentioned, the synced keys are living on multiple devices. They're synced through the cloud. They're copied. They can be shared. The hardware-bound key lives on the USB key or another piece of hardware, and you can have multiple physical keys, but you can't really share one key because it's physical. You can give it to somebody, but other than that, no one can really steal it from you in any other way. So if you're new to this and you're thinking, well, how do I choose the right passkey solution, right? I will mention that a lot of the presentation details here I actually borrowed from some Yubico presentations, and the reason I did that is because they have been in the space for a long time, and they have really good materials on like this, and that show you how to differentiate between different technologies when it comes to passkeys and physical security keys. Now, the easiest way to think about this is that basic consumers who are just trying to access resources on the internet, right? Or enterprises that are trying to make the authentication journey a lot easier for users in 2023 and beyond, where everybody pretty much has a smartphone. They now have choices other than the legacy multi-factor authentication technologies that we discussed earlier. And that choice is to deploy, software passkeys, or potentially to give more consumers that are at greater risk, such as journalists, as an example in the slide, they can give them physical keys, right? So for example, say you have a web application that you're developing, and you're as part of the development of that web application, you're trying to revamp the multi-factor authentication for that application. Now you have a choice, right? You can either stick to some of the legacy technologies, which carry their own issues, right? So for example, if you're supporting SMS multi-factor authentication, that means your website will need to integrate with most likely a third-party provider that will send text messages to all of the users that you have, which also means the users need to provide their phone numbers, right? And you have to store them. So that's, kind of PII data in some jurisdictions, right? And so this is going to cost you money, right? In terms of the fact that you have to have that relationship with the provider, and you're usually going to be paying for text messages. You know, now you have a choice. You can use software passkeys, which generally just live on the user's phone and are not going to need to have a lot of care and feeding. But if you have users who are consumers who are at risk, you should consider physical keys because they're a lot more resilient. They can be copied and so on and so forth. Some of the other use cases for enterprises, such as first-line workers, office workers, and privileged users, such as administrators, you know, I agree with Yubico's recommendation that those use cases do deserve physical passkeys, which are, and you know, examples of which are using YubiKeys. Just gonna try to quickly go through some of the last slides here. What are some of the passkey enterprise challenges, right? So if you were to deploy software passkeys, some of the issues you would run into are listed here. So one is remote work risks, right? Your users can, for example, users are working remotely. If you're allowing them to use software passkeys that sync, as we mentioned earlier, with third-party clouds, such as iCloud or Google, well, frankly, those users, if they're using multiple devices, so for example, I'll have an iPhone and my kid will have a, you know, maybe my kid is on my account and they have a iPad and my wife has another iPhone, right? And we're all sharing an account for the sake of this example. Well, the passkey for my enterprise will be shared on all of those devices. And in some worst case scenarios, if I get tricked into enrolling an attacker's device into my iCloud or Google account, well, guess what? They're going to get the passkeys from the enterprise synced to them as well. Other examples of issues include, you know, suppliers, right? Supply chain issues. For example, you have a supplier, they're managing your enterprise in some way. You're allowing them to use a passkey. The person, that supplier employee leaves, they still have access to the passkey. In some cases, you may not be able to deprovision that access. Compliance and support complexity also exists, right? The passkeys right now are not, they can only live in one cloud. They can only be synced in one cloud. There's no solution yet that can allow for Apple passkeys to be synced to Google passkeys, Microsoft password managers, etc. Right. So just quickly, that's actually, you know, the end of the presentation. The other thing I would say is there are additional information that you can get access to, and the easiest way to do that is to go to the FIDO Alliance. And there's also a Bright Talk presentation that you know, that talks a lot about these technologies that you can see as well at the link in front of you. So that's passkeys in 26 minutes.
Well, Vlad, I want to thank you very much for this excellent presentation. It opens many doors to the risks related to this. I was not aware of such importance of multi-factor authentication. And, you know, I'm wondering if you have your usual passwords on your computer, your home devices, your bank and things like that. Is that truly dangerous? How risky is it to continue using it?
Yeah, so it's sometimes it could be risky if your computer is being used for different purposes. So for example, if you go to risky websites on that computer, right, and the computer is storing these important credentials, some bad actor could get into your computer and compromise it and then have access to the rest of your life, basically. So yeah, it all depends really on how you're storing those credentials and what type of activities are you doing on that computer.
Yeah. Sometimes I get emails asking me to verify my password just to check that it's correct, because they're telling me that I'm not getting emails or I'm not getting something, but those are pretty risky, right?
Those are usually phishing emails.
Yeah. Incredible. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for this presentation. We all have to be aware. We all collect lots of passwords, but we clearly need to be much more aware of that, and I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, James. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Really, really great pleasure.